Sometime later. They all ride horses and carts together, and Ash thinks they have left the base of operations. 3 days had already passed since they began to move north, back to the fortress. He sits in the carriage, and his necklace begins to emit a red glow. He raises his head, sighs loudly, and thinks that he is about to die of boredom. He calls Lucas loudly and asks if they will arrive soon. He tells His Highness with a worried expression that they are almost there. He asks him to be patient a little longer. Ash thinks he has that feeling. It's like he's talking to a parrot. He says the same thing every time. A system window appears in front of him, in which it is written that he can now choose a class, and he thinks that in any case, he needs to decide as soon as possible. After completing his training, he received level 5. It is at the 5th level that the game asks you to choose a class. A system window appears in front of him, in which it is written that his characteristics are Strength and Endurance 2 points, Agility and Mana 3 points, and Intelligence 5 points. Ash looks at this and asks why his characteristics were pumped up like that. What kind of disgusting character did he get? However, there is something interesting. No matter what characteristics are improved, he can choose absolutely any class that exists in the game. The problem lies at the end of the list. In the system window, it is written, Class Commander is new. A special class is unlocked for completing the Hellish Iron Man mode. Ash looks at this and thinks that this is it. This is the first time he has seen a class like this. What kind of class is this anyway? A special class unlocked by completing Hellish Iron Man mode. Is this a so-called hidden class? Ash continues to silently stare at the system window that floats in front of him for several seconds. He thinks that the last time he got the name was a stubborn commander. Why is this whole world screaming at him that he should choose the commander class? In the system window, it is written that stubborn commander is a skill obtained for the high morale of a person who never gives up, regardless of the circumstances. This skill creates immunity to mental debuffs from any enemy within a radius of 10 meters. Ash looks at it and thinks it's a great skill. However, at the beginning of the game, this skill is of no use, because mental debuffs appear towards the end. It's risky to choose a class he knows nothing about. He sighs and says how bad it is. Lucas loudly tells His Highness that he can already see Crossroad. Ash was very happy with what he just heard. He leans out of the window and with a joyful expression on his face says that it has finally happened. He looks at the city, surrounded by a huge fence. He looks at this city and thinks that Crossroad was the name of a fortress built in the southernmost part of the world. This fortress was built to hold back the monsters that endlessly advanced from the dark lake located to the south. In the past, it was the largest fortress in the entire empire, but as the monster invasion subsided, the army was redirected to other places. Due to the lack of an army necessary to defend the fortress, they began to hire mercenaries. Old pensioners who had death in their backs and who were kicked out of the battlefield, replaced by inexperienced newcomers. Mercenaries were hired regardless of their nationality or ability. The Empire simply needed cannon fodder on the front line. When the fortress was filled with cheap lives, restaurants, banks, and hotels began to appear there. Tens of years later, the fortress turned into a huge city. At some point, people stopped calling Crossroad a fortress. Now this place is called a fortress city on the front line of monsters. This fortress had another name, ridiculing the mercenaries who blindly flocked here for money and their death, like moths. City of Suicides, City of Graves. Ash sits silently in his seat, looks out the window at the city, and thinks that it was the human Maginot Line. Crossroad. During the game, he did not pay attention to the fact that this city was much larger than he imagined, and more shabby than he thought. Anyway, should he become the lord of this city? Carriages and carts are driving along the city street, and many residents are looking at them. Lucas controls the horse and looks at these people who are standing nearby and looking at them. Ash looks out the window at these people and says nothing. He looks at the faces of these people and wonders why they look at him with such sad faces. He turns away from the window and thinks that although this is understandable. For the appointed commander and new lord barely returned alive after his army was crushed. A wide smile appears on his face, and he thinks that, however, he knew that something like this could happen, so he prepared. People notice objects that are lying in the cart and say that they should look there. Are these all magic crystals? Ash thinks that he deliberately placed these crystals so carelessly. 400 magic crystals from black spiders. Because they were high-level monsters, these magic crystals have a high degree of purity. It costs a fortune. So much that he will not have to worry about prosperity very soon. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so. After completing an impossible mission, he should have received at least something as a reward. In order for everything to go smoothly in the game, the main factor will be interaction with the townspeople. At the moment, the residents of the city completely lack confidence in him. But he already knows how to win their hearts. He smiles widely and thinks that they should wait a little. Using a simple and effective method, he will return and buy their damned souls. After some time, the carriage stops and Lucas opens the door. He bows and tells His Highness that they have arrived. Ash comes down the stairs and thanks him and says he did a great job. He looks at the huge and luxurious house of Lord Crossroad. He looks at it with great surprise and asks, "What is this?" He wonders if he will really live in such a place. He opens his mouth wide in surprise and thinks that he doesn't even have anything to compare it with. He never thought that his desire to have his own home would be achieved in this way. A guy with glasses runs out of this house very quickly, shouting loudly out of surprise with a worried expression on his face. He runs very quickly to Ash and loudly tells my lord that he is incredibly glad that he is alive. He looks at him in surprise and wants to say something, but stops. The guy says he has to wait. He shouldn't have called him my lord. He asks His Highness to accept his apology. Ash says he can call him whatever he wants. The guy grabs his hand, rubs his face, cries and says that he was very worried that scars would remain on his body. Ash thinks the name of this emotional man with hints of ignorant servant is Eider. In the game, he is the manager of the city. This guy does all the administrative work at Crossroad, from the location of structures to platoon management and various system tasks. That's why he's here. He will run the city with this guy. Eider opens the door to this building and says, "Welcome home." He points with his hand with a joyful expression on his face and says that he has already prepared a warm bath and a delicious dinner for him. He must rest properly. Ash looks at this with a very surprised expression on his face, and he calls out to His Highness. He comes to his senses, turns and says that he must make sure the soldiers are well rested. Lucas bowed and tells His Highness that he obeys him. Ash says he will have to rest today too. Lucas is outraged by this and tells His Highness that he should protect him. Ash brushes it off and says that nothing will happen overnight. He should rest, and tomorrow they will return to their business. Lucas is upset about this, and with a sad expression on his face, tells His Highness that he obeys him. He leaves with a sad expression on his face, and Eider tells my lord that he must follow him. Ash does so, looks at Lucas with a smile, and thinks that it looks like his room is on the first floor. They enter the bathroom, where a large bathtub is filling with water and a large amount of steam is rising. Eider points to this with his hand, and with a joyful expression on his face, says that a cozy and warm bath will wash away all his fatigue from the road and the smell of war. Ash looks at this with a happy expression on his face and thinks how long it has been since he took a bath. He was really tired after a long trip, so he was going to have a good rest. He takes off his clothes, thanks Eider, and says that he is free. He starts to unbutton his shirt and doesn't say anything. A sly smile appears on Eider's face, and he says that, by the way, it was simply incredible. He continues to smile and calls him a classic nerd. Ash was very surprised when he called him the nickname he used for his channel. Eider closes the door and says that he was able to complete the training. He would never have believed it. Ash turns to him with a very angry expression on his face, and is about to say something to him. Eider, with a very joyful expression on his face, raises his hands and says that he no longer has the strength to hide. That's right, he's the director of Empire Defense. Suddenly Ash punched him very hard in the face, which surprised him greatly. He flies several meters across this entire room after this blow and screams loudly because of the pain. Ash is very angry about everything that happened, and he thinks, is the director this freak? Was he brought here by this damn idiot? Eider adjusts his glasses with shaking hands and says he needs to calm down. He kneels down and speaks. That he asks for forgiveness for the fact that because of him he ended up in such a terrible place. He raises his head and with a very serious expression on his face says that, however, he, or rather this whole world, needs him. Ash doesn't listen to him, and with a very angry look on his face, he flies towards him and is about to punch him in the face. Some time later, Eider, with a very badly beaten face, cries and asks him to forgive him. Ash sits on the floor in front of him and says, okay, so anyway. So he is the same director. He agrees to this and continues to sit in front of him with his hands raised. Ash looks at him and asks, and he really is the director of this game, or rather this world. Eider says that's exactly how it is. Ash wonders why he talks like that. It pisses him off. He asks why he brought him here. Eider begins to look for something in his pocket. He took out a handkerchief, wiped his face, and said that this world has a true ending. And this is the only ending, which no one has ever achieved before. He restarted this world numerous times to get this ending. However, he never got the ending he craved, not even once. Ash asks, is that why he decided to ask someone else for help? Eider snaps his fingers and says that in short, everything is correct. Several large balls created by the system appear in front of them. Ash silently looks at this, and Eider says that he turned this world into a game and showed it to players from other worlds. The players opened up many possibilities that he had never thought of. He says with a sad and serious expression that, however, absolutely no one has been able to achieve the true ending. Ash asks, then, how is he different from the others? This is the first time he has heard of this true ending. Eider turns to him and says that even though he couldn't achieve the true ending, he did what no one else could. Ash remembers that he is the only one who was able to pass the Helman of Steel difficulty level. Maybe that's why. Eider says he believes he has the best chance of achieving the true meaning of this game. That's why he decided to bring him. Ash raises his fist and asks with a very angry look on his face, did he say to bring him here? He actually kidnapped him. Besides, he threw him into this damned training in the body of an idiot with a golden spoon in his mouth. Eider covers his head with his hands and says loudly that this was a mistake, something like a bug. He also did not expect this. Anyway, he should let him tell him something first, about the reward he will receive for helping them. Ash stops and asks what are these rewards. Eider says that if he leads this world to its true ending, he will grant him a wish. Ash looks at him blankly and wonders, does he mean wish, like in that popular manga? Eider says that technically, he is a being close to the god of this world. Ash looks at him and thinks that he looks like a real deceiver. Eider says he won't have any trouble giving him gifts when he sends him back to his world. Ash looks at him and asks if he can give him anything. Eider says loudly that he will do absolutely anything. Ash asks, even 10 billion won in cash. Eider adjusts his glasses with a wide smile and asks if he is only interested in 10 billion. He can give him hundreds of billions. Or does he want more? Ash looks at him with a very angry expression and thinks that he is definitely cheating. He will surely give him a bad check. Although, to be honest, he is interested in what he grants him the desire. There were many things he wanted to do. There was one thing he wanted at any cost. If he can really give it to him, then... He doesn't finish the thought and Eider asks, he has something he really wants to do, right? Something much more valuable than money. A dream he had given up on long ago, thinking he couldn't achieve it, right? Ash is silent as he looks at him and thinks that is when he realized that this self-proclaimed god was calling him, already knowing it. Knowing that he had something to regret. He knew that he had something that was tearing his heart apart. With a sad expression on his face, he says that he could not fulfill his deepest desire and gave up. Eider says that as long as he carries this in his heart, nothing is over yet. Ash asks, however, if he has such power, then why can't he save this world himself? Eider says there are many restrictions on his abilities. In this world, he is a simple person. That is why he needs an agent acting on his behalf. Ash says he understands him, but he has one more question. What happens if he dies? Eider says with a smile that everything will end. If he dies, he dies. Ash grabs his head with his hand and says that this is very bad. Eider raises his finger and says that life is a coin game. There are no saves or loads here. It seemed to him that he knew this very well, because he completed the game in Man of Steel mode, didn't he? Ash looks at him with a calm expression and thinks it's true. The game has always been like this. The game may have been about convenience at times, but once it got to the point of death, it became incredibly ruthless. Eider says that if he wants to return to Earth right now, then he can send him there. Ash was very surprised by this and asked if he was telling him the truth. Eider says that of course it is. He smiles and says that to be honest, he was going to ask that right away. But something happened, so he asks him to choose. He raises one hand and asks if he will take the chance to reach the true ending and get the opportunity to fulfill his deepest desire. He looks at him with a serious expression on his face, raises his other hand and asks, or will he return to a peaceful life, during which he will not have to put his life on the line? The choice is entirely his. Ash looks at him silently for a few seconds and thinks that before he would have returned without hesitation. However, two things stop him. Firstly, he wants to fulfill that desire. And secondly, this is quite feasible, isn't it? He beat this game on impossible difficulty. He knows absolutely everything about this game. He smiles and thinks, does he need to go through the game again? And what will stop him? He agrees and says that no matter what it turns out to be, he will try. Eider was very happy about this and asked loudly, is he serious? Ash agrees and says that he will try his best, so he'd better help him properly. Also, he must not forget about his wish once he reaches the true ending. Eider is very happy about this and says loudly that he can use it like a yard dog. Ash says that he insists. He doesn't finish speaking, comes up to him, pokes his finger at him, and with a serious expression on his face, says that he must sell all the magic crystals from the black spiders before the morning. Eider was very surprised by this and asked what he said. Ash asks what's wrong with a very angry look on his face. These are items that can be exchanged for money. He has a place where he can sell it, right? Eider puts his hands in front of him and says that everything is true, but it's too late and the market is closed. Ash starts emitting a very dark aura and looks at him angrily and tells this idiot that he should shut up and do everything as he said. He can sell overnight or at dawn, he doesn't care. He just has to finish this by morning, okay? Eider is very afraid, agrees to this, and says that there are 388 magic crystals of black spiders. This will bring him a huge amount of money, even if he sells it at an average price. So what was he going to do with all this? Ash looks at him and says that there is an empty spot on his team. Eider was very surprised by this and asked what he meant. Ash smiles very widely and chuckles because of this. He wonders, does he really need an answer? Sometime later. He walks towards the Mercenary Guild building and thinks that of course it's time for the gacha. He tosses a few coins and deftly catches all these coins with his hand. He smiles widely and asks how about 100 tries. At the same time, near Ash's house there are several carts filled with gold, and next to these carts there are several soldiers and Eider is sitting with a very tired expression on his face. Ash and Lucas stopped in front of the Mercenary Guild building and heard loud noises coming from there. He smiles and says they are quite energetic. Lucas looks at him and tells His Highness that he will go in first. Ash doesn't listen to him, opens the door with his foot and loudly and boldly greets everyone. All the people who were inside immediately turn, look at them, and are silent for several seconds. A big bald man loudly asks who he is. Did he want to die? Ash, with a very angry expression on his face, loudly asks this freak what did he say. What are they, dirty dogs, looking at? He scared this guy so much that he started shaking by grabbing him by the head and with a very angry expression on his face saying that he is actually their employer. Did he want a quick death? Afterwards, he and Lucas walk through the hall while people look at him and say that this is the third prince, Ash. Is this the same prince? She heard that he killed his entire platoon on the front line. But haven't we dealt with the spiders? Ash looks around and wonders, I wonder if there is anyone standing here. You can get new characters in the Mercenary Guild. Of course, the extent of their benefit will depend on their rank. And now he needs the best of the best. He notices a man sitting on a chair and a purple glow emanating from this man. This old woman smokes her cigar and says to him, welcome. She pauses, looks at him with a smile and continues telling His Highness that the Continental Mercenary Guild is Crossroad. Ash looks at her with a very surprised expression and wonders if she has an SR rank. He sits next to her and asks, "Can you find out her name?" The old woman gets to her feet and says that of course he can. She hits her chest with her fist and says with a smile that her name is Jupiter. She is honored to meet him. Ash thinks she is an SR rank lightning caster. He can't believe that she's sitting in the mercenary guild. He says that he has never seen its form before. Which country does she belong to? Jupiter sat on a chair and says that this is the form of their Everblack Empire. He might not recognize this model, since this form is already several decades old. Ash looks at her with a smile and asks, "So she served the Empire?" Jupiter says that she served for 30 years. She was even the captain of the 2nd Caster Squadron. And after she retired, she began to earn money as a mercenary. Ash says that sacrificing oneself for the country, even after retirement, is an example of a true soldier. Jupiter takes the glass with his drink and says that's not the point. She just really didn't have enough money. She swirls the glass in her hand and asks His Highness what brought him to such a humble abode. Ash asks with a smile what else could bring him to the mercenary guild. Logically, he is looking for mercenaries. Jupiter looks at him and asks, "So he's not here to buy some cannon fodder who's willing to die for him?" Lucas got very angry about what she said and is about to tell her something and is about to take out his sword, but Ash stops him. Jupiter looks at them with a smile and says that everything is fine. Rumors of the battle on the front lines had already spread everywhere. It seems he had to pay a heavy price for his incompetence, even though they are truly pathetic people who fight for money. Many mercenaries gather next to her, and she, with a serious expression on her face, says that they should not be considered idiots who are digging their own grave. Ash looks at this with a serious expression on his face and says that he understands that. He gets up from his chair, stands in front of the crowd of mercenaries, and says that they should listen to him. He looks at them and asks in a serious voice, "Don't they all sell their lives for a handful of coins?" He raises his voice and asks if selling life is the only thing they can do, or is he wrong? And now they are suddenly afraid to name the price of their lives. He hits the bar counter with his hand and asks, "Aren't they idiots who are digging their own grave?" He smiles and tells Jupiter that this smells of self-deception. She was embarrassed by this and is about to ask something, but stops. Ash asks, "Her career is certainly bright, but wasn't she fired for secretly stealing from military funds?" Jupiter was very surprised by what he said. Ash looks at her with a smile and asks, "It's a lot like digging your own grave, isn't it?" He thinks that most likely she did not think that he knew about her past. He says that she was involved in everything from corruption to smuggling with enemies. When she was caught, she was kicked out and fired in disgrace. And she still proudly wears her military uniform. He raises his voice and says this is so shameless. He thinks she is the embodiment of corruption. A corrupt soldier, rotten to the core, a disgracefully discharged veteran. But as a fighter, she is unsurpassed. A heroine more like a pirate than a soldier. This is what kind of woman this is, the lightning caster, Jupiter. She exhales the smoke from her cigar and tells His Highness that although her end was not the best, she still has the pride of an imperial soldier. She asks him to watch his words. She doesn't have time to finish because Ash calmly asks how much does she need. She must name the price of her pathetic pride. Jupiter silently looks at him for several seconds with a very angry expression on his face. Ash looks at her with a cold gaze and says that he told her to name the price for her to become his hunting dog. Jupiter smiles and says that despite how she looks, she won't come cheap. At least 100,000 Adels. Ash surprised her so much that she dropped her cigar by saying that he was ready to give 200,000. He doubles its price. Jupiter looks at him with a surprised expression on his face and is silent for several seconds. Ash thinks that this is a high price to pay for a mercenary, but he is the prince of the empire and the lord of this city. Moreover, Eider sold all 400 magic stones. Since he can get SR rank, then he doesn't need to talk about these 200,000. Ash shows her the card and says that he will buy her fear of death and is even willing to double her annual salary. He smiles and says that cowards who do not want to trade their lives can go home. But if they really are real mercenaries who want to hit the big jackpot, they can come to the western wasteland of Crossroad this evening. He went outside and thinks that after the guild, he needed to go to church. After some time in the church hall, a woman uses magic on him and releases very bright energy. She says everything is ready. However, the scar will still remain. Ash tells Lady Saint that he is grateful to her. She smiles and says he doesn't need to thank her. He thinks that she is the hidden R-rank heroine and also the best healer, Saint Margaret. Later, once he fulfills a special condition, he can recruit her. He gets to his feet, buttons up his clothes, and thinks that, however, he will not do this today. Ash puts it on a small column and tells the saint that, as he said earlier, he doesn't have time to finish because Margaret agrees with him and says that she brought everyone here who is now free. Ash notices Damien nodding at him and thinks that he seems to have adjusted well. He smiles and says they can start then. He still has a lot to do today, so it won't be easy. This evening at Crossroad West, Ash stands next to Lucas in a cemetery in front of a large crowd of people. He watches the soldiers bury previously killed soldiers and thinks that a parade of coffins has arrived from the front line. Next to Ken's grave lies a necklace he wore with a photo of his family. Ash remains silent, standing on the stage and watching what is happening. He thinks that the soldiers stand in formation, and the flags of the Empire cover each coffin. A large choir sings a song. In a city where death is so common and cheap, a proper funeral is a rarity. More importantly, compensation was provided to the affected families. Shocked by such a large sum, the news quickly spread among the townspeople from person to person. Rumors are like an avalanche, it cannot be stopped. He's not going to sugarcoat anything. Of course, it's a show, but it's a must. Here, on the front line, their battle should be known as a noble mission to save humanity. Ash takes a step forward towards the crowd of people standing in front of the stage. He says that he is the third prince and newly appointed lord, Ash Bonhatter Everblack. People look at him and ask, is this man really their new lord? Crazy prince. He looks like an idiot. He notices Jupiter standing in the crowd and thinks she has arrived just in time. Ash says this is what he wants to tell them. On the front line, mortality will continue to rise. New tombstones will appear in this cemetery every week, each of which will be sung by a choir. However, they should allow him to clarify something. Their deaths are more valuable than their survival. He thinks that all the funeral expenses and compensation for the dead were worth a lot. About half of the money he earned for the magic crystals went to compensation. And it is right. Death should not be something ordinary and simple. Ash says that he will therefore try to keep them alive as long as possible. He will do everything he can to ensure that they survive and continue to work on the front lines. So he asks them not to die. They must survive and take as much money as they can. They should not die and not make him pay for their funeral. Immediately after this, the soldiers raise their weapons and aim at the sky. They fire their rifles and Ash thinks that was the end of his speech. He wonders how the townspeople will perceive it. Is this an excuse for an incompetent commander? Waste of the disgusting lord's money. On the other hand, he doesn't care at all what they think about him. He just needs to prove his words with deeds. He must prove that he is the man who can save them. As long as he is on this front line full of monsters, the world will not rot into the abyss of oblivion. He says with a smile that it's time to pass the first level. In the system window that appeared in front of him, it was written that there were 3 days and 1 hour left before the start of the first level. Sometime later, after the funeral in the backyard of the Crossroad estate, Ash stands with Lucas in front of a pile of rocks that lies on the ground. In the system window it says, does he want to activate the teleportation gate? Ash smiles and says that of course he agrees to this. The stones begin to rise, and this greatly surprised Lucas. These stones are collected into a portal, which is immediately activated. The two of them stand in front of this portal and look at it. Lucas, with a surprised expression on his face, asks His Highness, what is this? Ash looks at this portal with a smile and says that this is the gate leading to the dungeon under the lake. Lucas is about to ask something about this, but Ash immediately understands what he wants to say, agrees and says that this is it. It's a clear passage leading to the enemy base, that's what he means. He thinks Empire Defense is a game of two genres, tower defense and dungeon attack. It was even written on the cover of the game. The levels in which monsters lay siege to Crossroad are defenses, but in between there are levels where the enemies don't attack. They can explore the dungeon beneath the lake and uncover the origins of the monsters. Clearing dungeons, this is called free exploration. The basic structure of actions in the game, alternating defense and attack. As he thought, this can be activated even before the start of the first level. This is an incredibly difficult game, but even so, this game remains fair. He really had to go through a lot in training, but the start is simply excellent. After all, he has Damien, who can easily be called an imbalanced character, and Jupiter with SR rank. Besides, now he has a lot of money. Ash smiles and thinks it looks quite real. Although it's not true, it's very real. He explained the rules of the game to Lucas and said that they could scout out the enemy base for the next level. Luca then hits his palm with his fist and says with a smile that he understood everything. He tells His Highness with a joyful expression that he is ready. Ash was very embarrassed by his reaction and wondered what it was. In fact, he should have the most questions. He, the prince whom he served all his life, has changed dramatically. Moreover, he knows the structure of the city in which he is for the first time, knows about the existence of the dungeon and how it works. It would be understandable if he thought anything was strange, but he's just following orders. Either he's crazy or there's something wrong here. He calls him and Lucas tells His Highness that he is listening to him. Ash asks if he wants to ask something. Lucas looks at him for a few seconds and doesn't say anything. He starts to tell him while he waits with a very serious, intense expression on his face, but stops. After a pause, he bows to him and tells His Highness that he is simply doing what he tells him to do. He doesn't have a single question. He is the sword and shield of His Highness. His task is to attack and block on his orders. Ash looks at him in slight surprise and thinks it's impossible that he doesn't have a single doubt. However, he says that he trusts him, and that trust is more important than any doubts or questions. He shakes with joy and thinks that he doesn't care about Lucas's AQ, he will need to reward him well. Ash approaches the portal and asks with a smile if he is ready to enter the abyss of hell with him. Lucas, with a determined look on his face, says that he will gladly go down to the underworld if he is with him. Ash smiles looking at him and says nothing. A system window appears in front of him, in which it is written that he must select a destination, and he clicks on the pier on the shore of the lake. After that, the two of them go inside the portal. After they were teleported, the portal immediately broke. In the system windows, it is written that loading and teleportation are taking place. Note: heroes can become stronger by receiving stronger equipment. Equipment can be obtained in dungeons or made in a forge. Ash says loudly that there is no need to just shine all sorts of windows with notes. It's too late to pretend to be a friendly game. They both exit through the portal and find themselves in a dark forest. Ash looks around and says that they are in the right place. He thinks that this black lake is the source of monsters, a hell that spews out nightmares. This dungeon cut off the southern part of the world. Lucas notices something strange, calls out loudly to His Highness, and says that he should look there. Bubbles begin to appear from under the water in this lake, which attracted his attention. Suddenly, the water diverges in two different directions, creating a long passage. Many human hands begin to emerge from the ground at the bottom of the lake, from which a bright blue glow emanates. A huge army of armor filled with energy crawls out of the ground with weapons in their hands. Ash looks at everything that is happening with very strong surprise and thinks that he really didn't want this to be it. Could this really be living armor? Why were these particular imbalanced freaks here? It doesn't matter what monsters he fights against at the first level. Be it goblins, mermaids, or even wyverns. Among a huge number of low-level monsters, if only not these guys. Why is his luck so bad? Lucas looks at this with a calm expression, takes out his sword and asks, "Are these the monsters they will have to stop this time?" Ash is very tormented by the fact that these monsters have appeared and notices a system window in which it is written that information about the enemies has been updated. Level 1. Information about enemies. Level 5 Living Armor Warrior. Number 1052. Ash was even more surprised by this and wondered, are there a whole 1,000 of these freaks? Lucas notices his strange reaction to what is happening and asks His Highness if he is okay. He turned very pale. Is he unwell? Ash clenches his teeth very hard out of dissatisfaction and calls Lucas by name. He falls silent and thinks that it seems like he already said this in training. They have very big problems now. 741. That's how many times he restarted this game. Each time the reasons were different. But as soon as he saw that the monsters of the first level were living armor, he started from the beginning without any second thought. Living armor are literally monsters made of armor. Their core is the ghost that resides within. Therefore, no physical attacks affect them. Of course, by the middle of the game, they become easier to deal with after acquiring some equipment, but right now, they have nothing that can help in the fight against these freaks. Why does it have to be these damn monsters? He even has anger boiling inside because of this. As if someone is deliberately trying to prevent him from completing this game. Monsters begin to crawl out from the bottom of the lake onto the shore, and he thinks that there are still 3 days left before the start of the level. Ash looks at this crowd of monsters standing in front of him and says that they should go back now. Lucas stands next to him and agrees with His Highness. They leave and Ash thinks that all he can do is do everything in his power. Sometime later, he returns home and loudly calls Eider. He walks through the house, continues to call him, and he asks my lord, has he returned yet? Ash walks next to him and asks what is the state of the troops in the city. Eider says they now have 526 men who can be sent to the front lines. Ash turns to him sharply and loudly asks what did he say. He tried so hard, but they only have a little over 500 men. Eider is scared by his reaction and says that most of the warriors died during training. Classic Nerd gets very angry at his character and loudly says that he is a damn idiot. He calms down and asks how many can they hire. Eider says that they have already hired all the mercenaries in the city. Ash asks, does this mean there is no one else left? Eider thinks about this and says that at least in this city it is so. Ash looks at him with a serious expression on his face and says loudly that he should then send people to the nearest city for help. He should say that he will pay twice their normal salary. Eider writes this down in his notebook and says that he understands it. Ash says that he must also send a message to the imperial capital. He should tell you that the monsters have already begun to perform and they need maximum support. Eider writes this down and asks my lord if he is sure about this. Ash thinks that asking for support from the Empire is triggering a special fatal event that will happen later. But now they have no choice, because he must survive at any cost. He leaves with a puzzled look on his face and says that he is sure of it. He should contact them. Eider smiles and agrees with him. Ash turns to him and says that he must also call all the carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, and alchemists in the city, although it is better to draft them into the army. Eider was surprised by this decision and says that if they do this, the processing of magic crystals will stop. Ash, with a very angry expression on his face, leans towards him and asks, they will soon have no stone left of the city, and he thinks that he is worried about some crystals there. He should stop processing and drag them all here. Eider says loudly that he understands him and will take care of it right now. He immediately leaves and closes the door behind him. Ash remains in his office, sighs dissatisfiedly, and thinks that the difficulty of this game is definitely not normal. To be honest, until this moment he had not made up his mind, but apparently there is no time for such a luxury as fear. The more complex the game, the more variables there are. In the system window, a message appears in front of him. Does he accept his class as Commander Novice? Ash thinks he'll have to go all in. He presses the button and says that so be it. He agrees to this. The system congratulates him on becoming a rookie commander. Ash looks at this with a dissatisfied expression on his face and thinks what cheap effects are there. Suddenly he felt very strong pain and some strange changes, which made him scream in surprise. He breathes heavily because of what happened and wonders what it was. He feels like he just had. A system window appears in front of him, in which it is written that a 50% debuff has been applied to the growth characteristics. Ash looks at this with a blank expression on his face and asks what just happened. The system notifies that a 50% debuff has been applied to equipment ownership. He looks at this with a very surprised expression on his face and thinks about it all for a few seconds. He swears very loudly and asks if they are bullying him right now. He squeezes the system window so tightly and asks, what is this all about? What class can even apply such bad debuffs? Ash grabs the poker that was standing next to the fireplace and loudly asks who came up with such stupid traps. He's gonna kill that freak right now. Suddenly system windows appear in front of him, in which it is written that he acquires the ability Totem of Attack, Totem of Defense, Super Buffer, Main Order, and now he can use the group synergy system. Ash is still very angry about the debuffs he received, but he stops and silently reads everything that is written in these system windows. He calmed down and asked what else is this. He reads about his new abilities and asks if it turns out he can give his allies a bonus buff. While he is on the battlefield, his allies receive a buff to defense and attack. Now he understands what these debuffs were for. Ash looks at this with a thoughtful expression on his face and thinks that if you think about it, it's quite nice. In addition, there is a special class system. In the system window, it is written that group synergy is a feature of the commander class. Depending on the classes of party members, they may receive a bonus to characteristics. He must try different combinations. Ash smiles and thinks this class is awesome. He is used to being a player, managing everyone from the sidelines. He draws attention to the poker, which he took in a fit of rage and was surprised at this. Because he calmed down, he hung it back in its place. The next day at his house, Ash looks at something with a blank expression on his face and asks if he will explain to him what happened. Eider, with a worried expression on his face, says that they disobeyed the draft order. So he had to bring in their leaders as quickly as possible. They both look at several tied-up people kneeling in front of them. Ash turns to him and with an angry expression on his face says that this is actually a kidnapping. The president of the Blacksmiths Union, with a dissatisfied expression on his face, loudly asks, what does all this mean? The president of the Joiners Union, who sits with the angry president of the Masons Union, loudly says that he was torn right out of the process of processing magic crystals. Will he take full responsibility for the loss of their profits? The president of the Alchemists Union, like the rest, is dissatisfied with what is happening and with an angry expression on his face asks, isn't this too much even for a member of the Imperial family? Ash looks at them with a surprised expression and thinks they are mad. This can be understood just by looking at these faces, red from screams. First, he should apologize. He emits a very ominous dark aura and asks with an evil expression on his face, did they want to die? He looks at them with a very scary expression and asks if they dare to raise their voice in his presence. Who do these old idiots think they are? He presses his fingers on the table so hard that he begins to break it and says that if he, the prince of this country and the lord of these lands, calls them, then they must immediately come on their mountains without excuses. And they decided to play on his feelings. Did they want to die? All the presidents look at him with very pitiful and sad expressions on their faces, and one of them says that they sincerely apologize to him. This is their first time serving a lord from the Imperial family. Classic Nerd thinks it's very convenient to be Ash in this situation. The negotiations were successful. The presidents were untied. They stood up and one of them loudly apologized and asked, is he saying this seriously now? Ash smiles and says that of course it is. He will provide them with 20% of the crystals received by the army at the original price. If they have direct access to production materials, then it will be very profitable for them, isn't it? They must trade with each other directly. But in exchange for this, if he orders them, they will prioritize the production of military equipment. Of course, he will pay exactly what is needed for production. What will they say to this? That's not a bad deal, isn't it? He looks at them and thinks that using money and power, he was able to interest them. At the moment, this is the best he can afford. Some might say that this is a waste of money. The presidents rejoice at this proposal and loudly say that they agree and are ready to try it. When can they start? Ash looks at them with a joyful smile and thinks that there is nothing in this world that can be trusted more than money. The system window says that there are 2 days and 13 hours left before the start of the first level. Sometime later, Ash says he thinks they've already heard briefly about the situation from Lucas. Monsters, or more precisely, 1,000 living armor, are heading to this city right now. Estimated arrival time is about 2 days. He looks at those standing in this room and is silent for several seconds. Ash notices that they are surprised by this and thinks that judging by their facial expressions, they are just now realizing that they are in huge trouble. Lucas, with a serious expression on his face, asks His Highness what is required of them. Ash says they need everything they can do. From now on, he will give instructions to each of them. Lucas, who is now the commander-in-chief of the troops, says that he will do everything in his power. Ash says that their soldiers are too sluggish, so he will have to train them. Lucas says loudly that he will do whatever he orders. Lily, with a worried expression on her face, struggles to find words and calls out for His Highness. She looks at him with a worried expression and says that as he can see, she is. Ash doesn't let her finish, apologizes and says that, however, he really needs her help. She won't be on the battlefield, so she doesn't have to worry so much. Lily asks, but what is required of her in this case? Ash appoints her to the role of leader in the restoration of protective artifacts, and she, with a thoughtful expression on her face, timidly says that she understands him. He mentally apologizes to her for upsetting her and thinks that, however, she can forget about resigning for now. She will suffer as a civil servant of this wretched city for the rest of her life. Jupiter smokes his cigar and asks His Highness if she can ask him just one thing. She asks with a smile, that annual salary he was talking about. If one old mercenary performs well, will it be increased? Ash thinks what a greedy old woman she is. The peculiarity of her crazy love for money is exactly the same as in the game. He says that of course it is. He will increase the pay depending on merit. Jupiter smiles slyly and tells His Highness that then he should already be preparing for promotion. She received the role of commander of a special forces army and says that there is no mercenary who does her job better than her. Eider hands Damien the crossbow and Ash says he should take it. He prepared it especially for him. He took it and the system notifies that this is an ordinary crossbow of the 10th level. Attack from 10 to 15 points, strength 30 points, no bonuses. Damien, who received the role of a long-range sniper, says that since this is an order from His Highness, then he will try. Ash looks at him and thinks his posture is a little sloppy, but considering how good he was at shooting them out of cannons, he'll get used to it quickly enough. He asks, by the way, what happened to his glasses? Has he decided not to wear it anymore? Damien heard his question and looked at him with a surprised expression. He agrees and says that, to be honest, his vision was too good, so he wore any glasses to somehow limit this. He smiles with a kind expression on his face and says that since he now needs this vision, he decided to take it off. Ash watches them interact with each other with a small smile. Eider, with a joyful expression on his face, says how lucky this is. He was just worried about the overlapping characteristics of the glasses. He immediately calmed down after feeling the oppressive aura from Ash, who hits the table with an angry expression, looks at him, and tells him that he should shut up. Sometime after the operation meeting, the south wall of Crossroad, the two presidents run to him and, confused, say to His Highness, welcome. Ash waves his hand at them and says that he is here to find out how things are going with the castle wall. The president of the Blacksmiths' Union looks to the side with a worried expression on his face and says that in fact everything is not very good. No attention was paid to this for quite a long time. Ash looks at him silently for a few seconds and thinks about what he said. He turns to Eider and with an angry expression asks, since this city is a fortress, then why did everyone forget about the basis of all foundations, repairing the walls? What was he even doing here? Eider, with a worried expression on his face, says that he didn't have any money before. Since monsters began to appear less and less often, the production of magic crystals dropped significantly. Because of this, the former lord of the castle cut the budget. Ash asks if he thought this fortress was built to keep monsters at bay, didn't it? He thinks that the strength of the fortress has dried up due to the lack of invasions. How ironic that is. He waves his hand and says loudly that they can use any money and materials. They must strengthen and repair this wall until they collapse exhausted. Is this clear to everyone? The two presidents loudly agree with His Highness and watch him leave. Ash waves at them and tells them that they can get back to work now that the monsters won't wait for them to finish. Sometime later at the carpenter's workshop, Ash stands in front of the line of people working here and says that it seems they are already aware of the whole situation. For the next 3 days, they will create. He pauses. A big smile appears on his face, and he says that they will create a wall. This surprised the president, and he asks what he means. Ash says he needs a wall. It's such a tall thing. He understands, right? This wall will block the path. The president looks at him with a surprised expression, apologizes for him saying this, and says that monsters can easily break through a wooden wall. He doesn't think it will perform well. Ash says he doesn't need a wall to hold them back forever. The president apologizes and asks, then what does he want to achieve with this? Ash smiles and says that all they have to do is make a wooden wall like he said. He starts waving his arms and says loudly that this wall must be incredibly high. He spreads his hands to the side and says that it should also be strong. At the climax, he raises his hands high and says that it should be a wall. He looks at these carpenters who are standing in front of him and asks, now they understand him. He raises his voice and says that now they must stop asking questions and get to work. He thinks that in this way, in the remaining 2 days, while everyone was doing their own thing, preparations were in full swing and time flew by quickly. The system notifies you that there are 30 minutes left before the start of the first level. One of the soldiers watches the forest through a telescope in complete silence. He notices an army of living armor coming out of the forest towards the city. This soldier turns around and says loudly that they have come into view. Another soldier begins to beat a drum loudly and says that they are advancing. Many monsters that have come out of the forest are slowly approaching the city with weapons in their hands. Ash, who is there, loudly says that they do not need to be afraid. He stands on the tower and says loudly that these monsters are just a rabble that will try to take them in numbers. He looks at this living armor and thinks that of course this is a lie. These are the worst monsters you could ever encounter in the beginning, a legion of living armor. Ash loudly says that they are the strongest army in the southern part of their empire. He thinks that this is also a lie. They are just a group of traveling mercenaries, consisting of old pensioners and inexperienced soldiers. He says that they are perfectly prepared for defense and their equipment is in the best condition. He thinks that no matter how much he lies, no matter how much money he invests, this preparation is still not enough. Ash loudly says that they can stop these monsters, so there is no reason to worry. He thinks that everything he said was just a bluff. He says loudly that they just have to follow his orders. And then, today, they will be able to celebrate victory. He thinks that the only one who is worried here is most likely him. He looks at a huge cloud with thunderclaps that appears above a huge army of living armor that is heading towards the city. A nervous smile appears on Ash's face as he looks at this, and he mentally wishes Jupiter good luck. He continues to look at these clouds and thinks that it depends only on her whether they will be able to pass this level or not. At the same time, Jupiter, from whose eye lightning comes, stands in the forest with her squad of young mercenaries and tells these newcomers that the time has come. They must look at it and learn. Jupiter and his squad are riding horses in front of an army of living armor, and Ash, who is watching this from afar, thinks that all monsters have one common goal. And this goal is the destruction of humanity. If there are no obstacles in front of them, then in order to kill a person, they will rush along the shortest path. The ground suddenly collapses under the monster's feet, and he thinks that in other words, their actions are easy to predict. That's why his trap will work perfectly. Jupiter stops and looks at how the monsters fall into this hole one by one, and Ash thinks that they did not have time to dig a deep enough ditch, but this will be enough. He says loudly that she must act now. Immediately after this, yellow lightning begins to appear in the clouds above the monsters. Jupiter holds a ball of lightning in his hand, looks at it with a smile, and loudly says that in this case, it is the turn to fill her wallet with money. She uses the first skill, Let There Be Light, and fires a very strong ball of lightning into a large crowd of monsters. With this magic, she inflicted very severe injuries on a huge number of monsters that were in front of her. Jupiter continues to sit in the saddle and looks at the ditch in which there were living armor. The monsters that survived this attack begin to slowly rise, make loud sounds, and look at her. Jupiter, with a very angry expression on his face, asks these freaks what are they looking at. They must learn to respect their elders. A very bright yellow lightning bolt descends from the sky with a loud sound. Living armor, from which the same lightning emanates, looks at what is happening and stands still. Ash notices with surprise what is happening and thinks that this is her symbol. The lightning that descended from the sky comes into contact with the Jupiter cigar and it turns bright blue. Lightning also begins to emanate from her hand, and she says with a smile that today they will have roast metal for dinner. She, with an angry expression on her face, waves her hand, from which very strong lightning emanates, and loudly says that they should chew more carefully. She uses the second skill, and again there is light and a very strong lightning hits the crowd of monsters from the sky. The soldiers who stand on the city wall watch what is happening and shout loudly with joy. Ash looks at what is happening and thinks that the enemies were marked with the first skill, and destroyed with the second. A system window appears in front of him, in which it is written that the number of killed monsters is 56. Ash watches from afar and thinks Jupiter is doing a great job. But nevertheless, there are a whole 1,000 enemies. The living armor, which was not hit by her attack, continues to walk towards the city and destroys the remains of the armor that lie on the ground with their steps. A huge crowd of monsters continues to fall into the moat and rises on the other side. Ash looks at this and thinks that this attack was just a drop in the ocean. He says loudly with a serious expression on his face that they must retreat. Jupiter turns towards the city and says that everyone should run back. She and her squad ride horses while they are pursued by an army of living skeletons. The monsters start running faster to catch up with them. Jupiter turns to his group and loudly says that they must run if they want to live. They need to not turn around and just run. Ash watches as a huge army of monsters chases her squad and loudly says that everything is going as planned. He turns and, with a serious expression on his face, says loudly that they must do what he told them. Everyone must prepare. A guy from her squad turns around while riding a horse and notices a crowd of monsters that has almost caught up with him. Ash looks at what is happening with a worried expression on his face and thinks that there is still quite a bit left. Jupiter, with a serious expression on his face, loudly says that they should head inward. The guy looks at her and loudly agrees. They all jump together towards the wooden walls that are located at the entrance. They continue to ride their horses quickly while a huge army of monsters are running after them with loud noises. Ash was glad that these monsters did not catch up with them, and with a smile he thinks that Jupiter did a great job. The bright sun shines on these monsters from behind the huge wooden walls that stand in their way. They look around and see many of these walls that are placed at the entrance to the city. Ash mentally says welcome to these freaks and thinks, this is their first time in his kingdom of walls, isn't it? He smiles widely and thinks it's their turn now. What will they do, avoid these walls or destroy? Jupiter turns around as he gallops towards the entrance to the city and looks at the living armor behind him. Ash thinks that one way or another, their choice is obvious. They want to kill the people in front of them. He looks at how the monsters are running along a narrow corridor from behind the walls that were placed at the entrance and thinks that this is exactly what he planned. If they simply blocked their path, they would run forward, destroying the walls, but instead they are crowded into a narrow space. Ash raises his hand and loudly says that everyone should be ready to open fire. He looks at the monsters and thinks that their formation is becoming narrower and their mobility is decreasing. He walks to the edge of the wall and tells the soldiers that they have waited long enough. He points his hand forward with a wide smile and loudly says that they cannot spare the shell and just shoot. Immediately after his order, all the soldiers began firing their guns at these monsters. They continue to fire their cannons non-stop from different directions for several seconds. All the living armor that ran towards the city raised their heads and noticed the many shells that are flying at them. The shells hit this crowd of monsters and explode with loud sounds. Ash thinks this is the basics of defensive game strategies. Many projectiles continue to hit the ranks of monsters and explosions destroy a large number of them. The shells continue to explode in the crowd of monsters that have gathered in a narrow space, and Ash thinks that this is called path control. This is their death zone. He raises his hand towards these monsters and loudly tells the soldiers that they must keep shooting. Damien stands next to him, holding his crossbow and looking at the monsters with him. He asks if everything continues like this, then isn't that enough? Monsters cannot go beyond this point. Ash looks at this with a very serious expression on his face and says that there is more to come. The living armor with large ones in their hands has a very bright energy emerging from under their helmets, and they gather together. They get into formation and protect themselves with their shields from the explosions that occur from all directions. Ash looks at this with a small smile, but a worried expression on his face, and says that there is no way this will end that easily, because these damn monsters are incredibly durable. He thinks that. However, he foresaw this. He turns around and loudly tells Lily that she must act. She agrees with His Highness with a determined expression and says that they must activate the gravity field artifact. A metal circle appears above a huge bulb that emits a bright glow. Very strong energy begins to emanate from this artifact, and the two wizards who control it loudly say that everything is ready. A dome made of energy appears around several rows of living armor with shields. The monsters that are inside this dome are slowing down due to the fact that gravity has begun to act on them much more strongly. Ash says loudly that now it will be more difficult for them to move. He calls Lucas loudly, and he immediately agrees with His Highness and loudly says that they must prepare the ballistas. The soldiers who control the ballistae immediately point it in the right direction. All several ballistas located on the city wall are aimed at these monsters. Lucas raises his sword and loudly says that they should aim at these freaks. He points his sword towards the monsters and loudly says that the ballistas must open fire. The soldiers agree with him and shoot huge arrows. These projectiles penetrate the shields of living armor and destroy their bodies. Many shots hit the target and destroy these monsters with big and strong shields. Ash watches what is happening on the battlefield and thinks that the crossfire will increase the damage and kill these monsters with the help of the artifact and ballistas. Everything is going exactly according to his plan. One of the soldiers runs towards him very quickly, making loud noises. He approaches His Highness and says loudly that monsters are walking around the walls. Ash is surprised by this and asks what did he say. He turns his attention to the battlefield and notices that an army of living armor is passing between the wooden walls and going in the other direction. He clenches his teeth tightly out of anger and thinks that, of course, he thought that this could happen, but there are more of them than he expected. He loudly calls Jupiter, who, together with his squad, stands near the wall. Ash looks down at her and speaks loudly that she should deal with the living armor that is entering to the right of the barriers. They must fight them off by striking and retreating. Jupiter smiles and says that she will do as he wishes. She begins to gallop along with her squad in the right direction and loudly says that the real battle is about to begin. Several monsters with different weapons run very quickly towards her with very loud sounds. Jupiter raises his hand, into which he directs a very strong lightning and loudly says that they should try this. She releases a very strong lightning that hits these monsters, and Ash watches this and thinks that everything is going well. That part is something she has to deal with. Only those who go around on the left remain. He turns around, scares Damien by calling his name loudly, and with a serious expression on his face says that it is his turn. He raises his voice and says that he must shoot the monsters that are coming from the right. Damien agrees loudly, concentrates on what's happening, and takes a deep breath. He points his crossbow with a very serious expression on his face and immediately uses his special ability. He pulls the trigger and releases an arrow filled with energy. This arrow flies very quickly towards one of the monsters who are running towards the wall. His arrow hits the helmet of the living armor, causing this monster to begin to tremble very violently. Immediately after this monster dies, falls apart and falls to the ground. This greatly shocked the soldiers who stand next to Damien, while he says with a joyful expression that he got it. Ash looks at him with a smile and thinks that he had no idea that the 1,000-mile eye could destroy the soul of a ghost with an ordinary arrow. How broken is this ability he has? Ash looks at the battlefield and thinks that the center is the death zone. On the right, Jupiter handles everything. On the left, Damien controls everything. He looks at the counter of killed monsters in the system window and thinks that their number will soon be more than 500. He smiles and thinks that at this rate everything will go as usual, at least until the boss shows up. Even though they were under a lot of time constraints, All this preparation paid off in full. His attention is attracted by the fact that the remnants of spirits begin to rise from the killed monsters, fly in one direction, and wonder what it is. He raises his head, sees how it all comes together in one place, and thinks, nothing like that happened in the game, right? The system notifies that the number of kills has reached 500 monsters. All these spirits that gather in one place take the form of a face with an evil smile. Ash looks at this with a very tense expression on his face due to the fact that he did not expect to see this. A sign appears in the system window, which says that this is one ghostly knight of the 25th level. He thinks it is the boss monster of the Living Armor Legion, the Ghost Knight. This is what gives these freaks their strength. The Legion itself is quite strong, but even if you crush them completely, like the second phase, a boss will appear. But they haven't destroyed all the monsters yet. Then why has he already appeared? The ghostly knight that appeared did nothing. He did not use the area debuff, nor did he use any powerful attack. He just hung in the air and did nothing. However, this is not just a game, this is reality. The soldiers were very frightened by the appearance of this monster. They looked at it and loudly asked what it was. Ash notices this and thinks that even just the sudden appearance of a huge monster in the sky, the soldiers have already begun to panic. He looks around and thinks it's very bad. This is the difference between a war among people and a war between people and monsters. Primal fear, caused by the embodiment of terrible ugliness. The boss's appearance alone scares the soldiers to death. Because of all this, the efficiency of the front line fell below the plinth. Moreover, it's not just about scared people. The horse, which also noticed this huge monster, begins to kick and makes very loud noises out of fear. Jupiter, who is trying to stay on this horse, was surprised by this and asks what is going on. She lost her balance, fell out of the saddle, fell on her back to the ground, and hit her head hard. Many living armors, which she had to restrain, take advantage of this moment and calmly head towards her. Jupiter lies on the ground, looks at it with an angry expression on her face while blood flows from her head and says that this is bad. Ash also begins to panic about what is happening on the battlefield, looks at it with an angry expression on his face, and thinks that these freaks are breaking through. He sees an army of monsters running towards Jupiter, who is passed out and thinks that they are going to kill the people who are right in front of their noses. People from the Jupiter group got off their horses, walked together, and one of them loudly said that they needed to stand in a protective formation. They stand in front of the monsters with weapons in their hands, and one of them loudly says that they must protect the sorcerer. Ash looks at this with a worried expression on her face and thinks that Jupiter, the main striking force on the first level, as well as her entire group, are now in danger. Lucas calls out loudly for His Highness and says that they need to direct cannon fire towards her squad to help them. Ash turns to him, with a worried expression on his face, loudly refuses and says that everything should remain the same. If there is no death zone, then there will only be more escaped monsters. Lucas wants to object, but Ash does not pay attention to this and thinks that the soldiers standing on top of the wall were confused because the boss appeared. The number of cannon and ballista shots decreased, and the defenses, in which it seemed there was not a single gap, were soon broken through. He loudly says that they must concentrate on resuming fire, because the soldiers have lost their minds. Lucas agrees with His Highness. Ash, with a sad expression on his face, mentally apologizes to Jupiter and thinks that she needs to hold out a little longer. Sometime later, she suddenly opens her eyes and screams loudly. She gets up and puts her hand to her head because of the severe headache. She notices the blood that is left on her hand and asks if she is already at the age where she should be going through this. She notices a guy from her squad who runs up to her and loudly asks how she feels. They urgently need her help. Jupiter looks around and notices how people from her squad are fighting with a large number of monsters. She gets to her feet, holds her head because of the pain, and says what a disgusting situation. Apparently, the time to sit quietly has not yet come. The guy says loudly that the rescue squad is already on its way. They need to hold out until theirs. He doesn't have time to finish because a living suit of armor is running towards him with loud noises, and he turns sharply towards this monster. He interrupts the monster's attack with a very strong blow of his mace to the helmet. The living armor was able to withstand this blow on its feet and stopped. His helmet was bent very strongly from this blow, but this monster continues to stand in place with a weapon in his hands. The guy was very surprised by this and loudly asked what it was. How could this monster withstand such a blow? Jupiter is very surprised when she notices something that attracts her attention and loudly tells this newcomer that he should turn around. Suddenly, this guy is pierced with a spear, and he starts coughing loudly because of the damage he received. He turns around with a surprised expression on his face and wonders if he was attacked from behind. He was sure that all the freaks there had already died. He turns around and notices a living armor that is missing the lower part of its body, but is still able to move. The guy is about to say something and does not notice other monsters that attack him from the other side. Several monsters attack him at the same time, and he screams loudly in pain and calls for help. Jupiter is very angry about what is happening and loudly says that she will destroy these monsters. She is about to use her magic, but is very surprised when she notices something strange. She looks at her hand with an angry expression and realizes that something is wrong with her control of magic. A girl from her squad is grabbed by a crowd of monsters, which greatly frightens her. She screams loudly and says that they must let her go. The monsters mercilessly pierce her with their weapons and blood flows profusely from her wounds due to all these blows. The guy from this squad looks at all this with a very tense expression on his face and looks at everything that is happening around him. He throws down his shield and quickly runs away from the battlefield with loud cries. The badly wounded living armor swings its spear with loud sounds. This monster, which has no lower body, throws its spear with great force. This spear very quickly catches up with this fleeing guy and pierces his body. Jupiter looks at him, and this guy falls to the ground with a spear in his back. The small defensive line, supported by a couple of people, was broken in the blink of an eye. She felt the power of the living armor standing right in front of her. This smell of rusty armor and rancid water, it was the smell of drowned people. Jupiter was able to take control of herself, directs the lightning into her hand, and says that they should have stayed for the days of the lake. She looks at these monsters with a very angry expression on her face and asks very loudly, "Is it really that they don't want this old woman to calmly receive her money?" She releases very strong lightning bolts with which she attacks all monsters that stand in front of her. Monsters that were previously wounded stop moving, and the energy that comes from them begins to dissipate. Jupiter looks at this, breathes heavily due to fatigue, and thinks that this lightning was not like the previous ones, it was a weak attack. She sees a crowd of other monsters coming towards her and thinks that this seems to be the end of her. She calls the remaining guy from her group and loudly says that he should quickly run away from here. The guy with the spear turns to her and asks what did she say. Jupiter loudly says that at least one of them must survive. She will buy him time with her magic, so he must escape from here as quickly as he can. The guy loudly says that he will never do that. He would rather stay here and wait for the rescue team. She's a magician, after all, so she has to attack these monsters with her lightning. Jupiter was very surprised by this and asked what he said. The guy with the spear gets into a fighting stance and loudly says that the mercenary survival guide, rule number 2. You should never leave the magician's side. With a very determined expression on his face, he loudly says that rather than trying to escape from here without a horse, it's better to try to survive by helping her. Jupiter looks at him with a very surprised expression on his face and is silent for several seconds. This young mercenary's tactics worked. He did not kill living armor, but pushed and smashed them with his spear, maintaining his distance. The guy turns around and loudly says that he will somehow hold out, and she must prepare the next spell. Damien fires his crossbow at these monsters, and at least he tried to help from the wall. However, this was not enough to completely stop these living armors. When Jupiter was finally able to muster enough mana to call down a rain of lightning, the monster's spears pierced the young mercenary's body. She has a very angry expression on her face because of what happened and loudly says that these freaks must die. She uses her magic and shoots a lot of lightning from the sky. She stands still, looks at the body of the last guy from her squad, and wonders if she could have saved him by collecting mana at least a second earlier. The guy is lying on the ground, coughing up blood, and his body is shaking violently because of the pain he is experiencing and crying. Jupiter was too old to remember every death that happened before her eyes. She looks at him with a slightly sad expression, calls this newbie, and asks what is the first rule of survival for a mercenary. The guy was surprised by this question, turns to her, silently cries for a few seconds, and remembers it. He says the first rule is not to take on missions that have a suspiciously high price tag. After this, he begins to lose consciousness due to his wounds and calls for his mother before dying. Jupiter looks at the crowd of monsters that runs towards her and tells this child that his rules are stupid and naive. With this, he will never become successful. She clenches her hand tightly into a fist, into which she directs strong lightning and loudly says that if he wants to get rich, being a mercenary. She pauses, raises her fist, and says with an incredibly angry look on her face that if he wants fame. She defeats the monster with one blow of her fist using magic and loudly says that he should only take on dangerous missions with huge price tags. She defeats many other living armors with great speed and loudly says that he should stay as far away from his mages as possible. She stops, breathes heavily due to fatigue, and says that this is because it is the magicians who will take all the credit. Her hand is shaking very much due to pain, blood is flowing through it, and she is about to say something else, but stops. Jupiter put in her cigar, breathes heavily due to fatigue, and says that if he wanted to survive, then he should never have become a mercenary. She raises her shaking and bloody hand and wonders if she really doesn't have enough strength to even light a cigar. She gave up her hands, sees a huge crowd of monsters running towards her, and says that it seemed to her that everything was going as usual, and she finally got a well-paid job. Jupiter looks at this with a calm expression and thinks with a smile that this is how it will all end. Lucas rides towards her on a horse at high speed and tells her that she should not move. He swings his sword into which he puts his energy and looks at the monsters with an angry expression on his face. He runs next to the monsters and defeats several monsters with one blow of his sword. Jupiter was very surprised by what was happening and dropped her cigar from her mouth. Lucas turns to her and looks at her with a calm expression. Shortly before this, on the walls of the fort, after Ash gave the order to Lucas and went the other way, he hits the soldier on the back, which greatly surprises him and loudly tells these damn idiots that they must get together immediately. Were they really that scared of one monster? The system notifies that he is activating the Unbending Commander's skill. The soldiers immediately felt inspired, loudly agreeing and saying that they will no longer be afraid. Ash was very surprised by what was happening and wondered what just happened. He looks in surprise at his hand, from which comes bright energy, and ponders everything that is happening. The system notifies that the skill Unbending Commander provides immunity from madness to all allies within a radius of 10 meters. Ash wonders if this not only prevents mental debuffs, but also restores their morale. He turns around sharply, touches the soldier with his cloak, and loudly calls Lucas. He loudly says that he will deal with the soldiers and the restoration of the death zone. Ash says with a serious expression that he should take over the rescue team at this time. He must open the gate and go to the aid of the Jupiter squad. He thinks he literally told him to save his comrade from certain death. What a stupid order this is. Lucas doesn't think about it that way and agrees with His Highness and says he'll be back as soon as possible. Ash thinks that, however, there was not even a drop of doubt in his eyes. He watches Lucas ride his horse and mentally wishes him luck. He loudly tells the soldiers that they must rise up immediately and do their job. Currently, Lucas looks at her with a serious expression and tells her that she should hold on tighter. Jupiter was very surprised because he grabbed her by the clothes and began to ride his horse. Lucas puts her behind his back and begins to run away from the crowd of monsters that are chasing them. The living armor makes very loud noises after noticing them running away from them. Immediately after this, the monsters begin to throw their spears at them. Lucas swings his weapon and destroys all those spears that were thrown at them. He turns around and continues to control the horse, and Jupiter, who sits behind him, calls him a guy. Lucas asks what she wants. She asks if he would like to meet her granddaughter. She is quite a nice young girl. He turns to her and says that if she still has the strength for things, it would be better to spend it on restoring mana. The monsters actually haven't disappeared anywhere. Jupiter laughed at this and thinks that for his owner he is as sweet as possible, but Lucas is colder than ice without the prince. She says that she is grateful to him for saving her. He says she doesn't need to thank him. He is simply following His Highness's orders. He looks forward with a sad expression on his face and thinks about something. He remembers the people from her group who were killed by monsters and says that he wishes he could come earlier. Jupiter looks around and says that they will grieve after everything is over. They return to the entrance to the city, and she, with a very angry expression on her face, says that she has not been as angry as she is now for a very long time. The soldiers continue to fire cannons at the monsters, and Ash thinks that thanks to his skill as an unbending commander, the death zone was restored. He looks down and thinks that besides, Jupiter has also returned safe. But he lost 4 precious characters in the blink of an eye. He was overly confident in his gaming experience. Even in the game he had to monitor the psychological state of the soldiers, because there were also unusual states like fear or confusion. But in reality, the reaction was much more unpredictable. He couldn't even think that the horses might get scared. In future, he must be more attentive. Ash looks at the battlefield and thinks that this is all a result of reality. Fire spreading due to artillery salvos. The death zone begins to disintegrate and enemies begin to approach. He sees crowds of monsters running next to the burning wooden walls towards the city gates. Ash looks at this with a worried expression and thinks that from now on he will have to fight at the city wall. He would like to end everything here and now. In the system window, it is written that there are 277 armored warriors left alive and 775 killed. Ash looks at this and thinks that at least they have already dealt with most of the opponents. He should try something. This battlefield is still under his control. Lucas approaches him, calling His Highness to get his attention, and he says that he saved Lady Jupiter. Ash looks at him and thinks that he is reluctant to treat her like a lady. It's obvious that he won't like someone like her. After all, she was fired in disgrace, but he's great. He says he's glad she survived. Jupiter coughs into her fist and tells His Highness that she is ashamed, because she has made too many mistakes. Blood flows down her hand, and she says that because of her, very young mercenaries died in vain. It's such a shame. Ash says that she couldn't have known that monsters would appear out of nowhere and horses would start going crazy. It's not her fault. Jupiter looks at her bloody hand and says that this is not so. She made a mistake. Considering how old she is, she should react appropriately on the battlefield. She clenches her hand into a fist and says with a serious expression that this is why she will repay everything. No matter what it takes, she will bring him the heads of these freaks. Ash says she should focus on recovering because they will need her power soon. They see a huge army of monsters quickly running towards the gates of the city while soldiers fire cannons at them. Ash turns around and loudly says that the death zone has already been destroyed. They must cease fire. The soldiers do what they are told and smoke comes from the guns they fired from. Ash calls Damien and says he should rest. He immediately turns to him, breathes heavily with a tired expression on his face, and says that the enemies are still advancing. Ash puts his hand on his shoulder and tells him that there will be bigger prey for him. He needs to rest and recover a little, okay? Damien looks at His Highness and agrees with him. Ash looks at the living armor that is already trying to break through the city gates and thinks that the enemies have finally reached the walls of the fort. If the walls hold up, these monsters will begin to climb up them. Everything happens exactly as he predicted, after which he loudly tells the soldiers that they must prepare for close combat. The soldiers immediately take up their weapons and agree with him. Soldiers with maces and shields lined up and loudly telling the melee squad that they must move. Ash thinks that a fight without magic is a fight based solely on brute force. He looks at everything that is happening next to him with a worried expression on his face. A large crowd of soldiers armed with various weapons are walking towards the edge of the wall. At the same time, a large crowd of living armor climbs the wall and Ash thinks that a real war will begin here. He raises his hand and says everyone should pay attention. The monsters continue to climb the wall and almost reach the top. He waits for the right moment and loudly says that they must reset it now. Soldiers lift large buckets filled with stones. He continues to shout that they must throw it down, and the soldiers begin to throw stones at the monsters who are climbing the wall. Ash thinks that stones, pieces of steel, and other debris, like remnants of reinforcement, immediately flew from all their walls. His idea worked. Monsters fall down because of it, and he thinks that he ordered it to be collected throughout the city. A large number of living armor fell to the ground and were broken into pieces, but the remaining ones rose again. He looks at these monsters with an angry expression on his face and thinks how these freaks infuriate him. They continue to climb, and they don't care about all this garbage that flies at them from above. Ash says loudly that they should push them with spears. He clicks on the system window in front of his face and thinks that he needs to reorganize the group. Jupiter will be in charge. The system notifies that group interaction is being activated. In the system window are written the names and levels of the characters from his group, which Jupiter joined, and also that the combat bodyguards have one commander. This group does not weaken in morality. Double Magician, all magical attacks of party members are increased in strength by 20%. Ash was very surprised by this and wondered, are all magical attacks enhanced by 20%? It's just great. One of the monsters, with a blow of his sword, broke the spear of one of the soldiers, which frightened him very much and made him scream in fear. The soldiers loudly say that the enemies are advancing. A large number of monsters climb up with their weapons in their hands, and an army of soldiers stands in front of them. The living armors emit strong energy from their helmets and make loud noises. Ash looks at this with a worried expression on his face and thinks that from now on they will have to fight them in close combat. The soldiers with their weapons look at the monsters that stand in front of them, and he wonders if they can handle this. Unexpectedly, Lucas delivers a very strong blow with his sword and cuts the helmet of one of the monsters on the wall. Because of the clouds, very bright sun rays appear, which illuminate the entire city. Lucas runs very quickly along the edge of the wall and defeats many monsters with blows of his sword. He stops and holds his sword, from which strong and bright energy emanates. He says loudly that he will take care of them on his own. They just need to stand in their places and not let them go further. The soldiers he addressed immediately agreed with him. Ash smiles and thinks that for sure, it doesn't matter if they can do it, they have to do it. To survive, all soldiers need to give 200%. They have no choice but to fight and win. Ash turns around, loudly calls out to Lily and says that she must activate the next artifact. She agrees with His Highness with a serious expression on her face. She turns to the magicians and loudly says that they must activate the artifact of haste. Due to the activation of this artifact, a buff is applied to all soldiers. The system notifies that all comrades have become 5% faster, lasting 5 minutes. Ash looks at the system window with his character and remembers the skills he chose. He thinks it can help in close combat. The soldiers engage in battle with an army of monsters and loudly say that they must dislodge the monsters and push them away. Ash looks at this with a worried expression on his face and thinks they're doing okay for now. The soldiers continue to fight against the living armor and hold back their advance. Lucas continues to fight against the monsters and defeats them with blows of his sword. Ash looks at him and thinks that this is his first skill, a blow of strong will. This is a cumulative skill, making him stronger with each enemy he kills. He alone is half of these freaks who climb the wall. He looks at the rest of the battlefield and thinks that however this is not enough, because they are losing. One of the monsters wounded a soldier in the shoulder, which made him scream loudly in pain. The second soldier pulls the wounded man back and says that the wounded must retreat and exchange with other soldiers. Ash looks at what is happening and thinks that, unlike living armor, they are getting more and more wounded. Damien tells His Highness that he must return to the front lines. Ash stops him by putting his hand in front of him and thinks that they need his strength to fight the boss, and he also needs Jupiter. He looks at this with a serious and worried expression on his face and wonders what he should do. He looks at the fighting monsters and thinks that there must be a way to reduce the number of wounded and get rid of the remaining enemies. Immediately after this, he notices a bright pillar of fire that rises above the battlefield. Ash is very surprised when he notices this magical fire. This column of fire begins to grow, and it affects a large area of the battlefield. Lily, who is sitting on the edge of the wall, uses her fire magic, and destroys many living armors. Ash notices her using her magic with a very serious expression on her face and loudly calling her name. He was happy about this and said loudly that, of course, she can use magic. Lily was very surprised by this and asked what he said just now. Is he serious now? She was always a magician. Ash tells her it's amazing. She will get a promotion later. Lily sighs with a very upset expression on her face and says that she wanted to resign after all. Ash looks at her and thinks that apparently she is unable to cope with the severe depletion of mana due to fire magic. He comes up behind her, takes hold of the wheelchair, and says that there is no problem. In addition to this, she will also receive a decent bonus, so she has to add even more fire. Lily looks at him with a worried expression and says loudly that she wants to live. Besides, her mana is already running out. Ash says loudly that she should do this one more time, and now she must prepare. He quickly runs with her and loudly says that she must do this. Lily, with a very scared expression on her face, screams in fear and uses her fire magic. Ash thinks that thanks to the group's cooperation, magical attacks are increased by 20%, and the attack totem additionally increases damage by 5%. As a result, fire magic is enhanced by 25%. Ash loudly tells her flamethrower that she can do it again. Lily says in a dissatisfied voice that he should at least treat her like a person. Ash thinks that the soldiers ended up holding these monsters back with their bodies. Lucas killed them with his sword. He tries to give Lily a potion that restores mana and thinks that she burned the ranks of these monsters to ashes. Together, they defeated the remnants of the army of monsters, and the last of the living armor fell to the ground. The soldiers stand in complete silence for several seconds and think about what is happening. They begin to rejoice and say loudly that they have finally stopped them. They did it. Ash interrupts their celebration by loudly saying that it's not over yet. Lucas breathes heavily and looks at him with a tired expression. Ash loudly says that they cannot lose concentration yet, because there is still one more enemy left. The remaining remnants of the armor suddenly begin to rise and fly upward. All these remnants of armor fly towards the boss, who has been inactive all this time. All this armor gathers into one huge armor around this spirit. A sword appears in the hand of this boss, which is assembled from this armor. The transformation of this monster is completed, and it turns into a huge armor with an equally huge sword. The boss of this level lands next to the city wall after falling from the sky very quickly with loud sounds. Because of this landing, the ground shook, and this greatly surprised the soldiers. Ash thinks this is some kind of mockery of him. He looks at this monster with a very worried expression on his face and asks what kind of joke is this? How can this even be considered a level 1 boss? Ash stands still and looks at the huge monster with a terrifying aura that stands in front of him. His hand begins to tremble violently out of fear, but he tries to suppress this feeling and clenches his hand into a fist. He clenched his teeth and thinks that he cannot give in to fear. This is still a simple boss of the first level. Just a level 25th monster. He orders to open fire, and the soldiers begin to fire their cannons. They continue to shoot non-stop at this monster, and he loudly says that they may not spare the shells. Many cannon shots hit this monster, but it continues to stand still. This huge monster continues to walk towards the soldiers, despite the fact that they are shooting at it from cannons. Ash looks at this and says they should keep shooting. They must destroy it before it reaches the wall. He thinks that despite the incessant fire, the ghostly knight continued to advance. This is the most purposeful monster of all. Ash calls Lily loudly, which frightens her very much. She turns to him with a tired and frightened expression on her face and asks what he needs. He looks at her with a serious expression and says that they must activate the third artifact. She agrees with him and loudly says that they must activate the artifact. Ash thinks it's a magic multiplier, an R-rank artifact. This can double the effect of the magic used by the recipient. The system notifies that the effects of Jupiter magic are increasing. She closes her eyes as strong energy fills her body and says this is great. She has a very angry expression and says that it's like she's back in the good old days. Ash points to a huge monster that is approaching the city walls and says that she must attack the boss with everything she has. She needs to concentrate all her power on the breastplate. Jupiter begins to slowly walk towards the monster while she is affected by the buff from the artifact. Many yellow lightning bolts come from her hands, and she tells His Highness that he should be more careful with lightning. These lightning bolts also appear in the sky above the monster, and it makes loud sounds. A very strong lightning quickly flies down, and Jupiter says that even if he gets electrocuted, there is no refund. With her hand movements, she directs this strong lightning at a huge monster, which heads towards the walls of the city. The monster feels the very strong damage it receives from this magic spell. With this attack, Jupiter was able to make a hole in the boss's chest, where there was a lot of blue energy. Ash looks into this hole and realizes that this is the core of the soul. He turns around and calls Damien loudly with a serious expression on his face. At this time, he stands behind the ballista and loudly agrees with His Highness. Ash loudly orders him to shoot, and he immediately activates his ability. Damien fires his ballista and releases a large arrow filled with energy. The projectile hits the soul core, which was inside the armor, and cracks begin to appear due to this attack. The core of the soul that was inside begins to collapse with loud sounds. Ash is happy about this and loudly says that he did a great job. He thinks it's all over, but the monster still continues to move, and the energy in the boss's helmet begins to glow brightly. Ash was very surprised when he noticed this and thinks that this is some kind of mockery. The monster, which has already come close to the city wall, begins to slowly raise its huge sword. Ash looks at this and thinks that if this sword touches the walls, it will just collapse. He calls Jupiter loudly with a worried look on his face and says that she should hit it again. She creates many blue lightning bolts from her energy and asks if it decided to raise its weapon during the thunderstorm. This monster's sword is hit by many lightning bolts, which make loud sounds. Jupiter, with a very angry expression on his face, loudly says that this is his end. Many yellow lightning bolts appear around the monster's entire body, which begin to glow very brightly. Suddenly, blue lightning from the sky hits this monster very hard. The boss, who is attacked by lightning for a few seconds, begins to strike with his sword. Ash is very surprised when he notices this, and with a very worried look on his face, he loudly tells these idiots that they should run away. They must run away from this sword. The soldiers who are standing on the wall are very shocked by what is happening and look at how the monster is about to attack the wall. Lucas runs up to His Highness and loudly says that he needs to get out of here. He does not have time to finish because the monster delivers a very strong blow with his sword and destroys the wall on which the soldiers stood. They are thrown very strongly by a destructive wave, and they scream loudly in fear and pain. Ash fell due to this attack and says his back hurts. Lucas stands in front of him and asks His Highness if he is okay. Ash says he's fine. What happened to the wall? Damien, Lily, and Jupiter stand next to each other and look at what just happened. Ash turns around and sees a huge monster sword stuck in the wall. The energy inside the huge armor begins to slowly fade away, with the sound gradually fading away. The armor breaks into many huge fragments and falls to the ground, and the energy that was inside begins to dissipate. Ash looks at what happened to the wall and thinks that they have finally dealt with the boss of the first level, the Phantom Knight. From the fragments of armor that lie next to the wall, many spirits begin to fly away and fly upward. Lucas looks at what is happening and loudly tells His Highness that this is dangerous. Ash pats him on the shoulder and tells him it's okay. He looks at it and thinks that this is a sight he will never forget. This is the final outburst of the Phantom Knight's rage. A display of fear, confusion, and madness. All these souls are heading towards him, and he thinks that this attack does no damage. But if it works, it can plunge you into madness. Ash looks at this with a calm expression and says that from now on this is human territory. He directs his hand, from which a bright glow emanates, and says that this monster must disappear. The system notifies that he is using the Unbending Commander skill. He releases a very strong wave of energy, and the souls that were heading towards him immediately disappear. Many magical particles remain in the air above the city wall, which emit a bright glow. The soldiers look at all this with great surprise and ask, where did that giant and all those ghosts go? They look at these magical particles that float in the air and say with surprise that the prince got rid of them. Is it really over? Immediately after this, The clouds begin to dissipate and bright rays of sunlight fall on them. The sky turns blue again, and the bright rays of the sun illuminate the entire city. Ash raises his fist in the air and loudly says that they won and were able to survive. They will continue to win and live. All the soldiers who stand next to him look at him with a surprised expression on their faces, and he thinks that fear has begun to leave their eyes. Lucas looks at him with a calm expression and a smile, and Ash thinks that it was clearly visible how the horror of battle is replaced by the joy of victory. He continues to hold his hand above his head with a serious expression on his face, and thinks that no matter whether it was the effect of his passive skill or his words, it still felt good. He loudly says that they will crush all the monsters and continue to survive. He thinks all he did was scream his heart out. The system notifies that the first level has been cleared. The reward for completing the level has been awarded. He must check his inventory.